I'm very honoured to have been asked to speak at this important conference and to note that it has been very successful, addressing the issues of the rights of persons with disabilities on a north-south basis, and it's something that I absolutely welcome. I'm sorry that I could not have been here earlier to listen to the very valuable and informative contributions of all the other speakers. The rights set out in the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities are rights that all people have as people, regardless of physical or mental status. As mentioned time and time again, it is to Ireland's shame that it has taken this long to address the legal and administrative steps that would not only provide for its full ratification, but for its full implementation, the critical follow-through. While one accepts that Ireland's dualist legal system means that international treaties must be domestically incorporated in order to be enforceable and binding at the domestic level, it is simply unacceptable that it has taken 10 years to ratify this convention. The snails pace progress towards ratification is an issue that I have consistently raised in my capacity as my party's spokesperson for disability rights, and I am of the opinion that the delay for full ratification is a damning indictment of this government and their predecessors. The sense of anger and frustration amongst those living with a disability, their families, friends, and aware society is palpable. This is totally understandable. The 600,000 people with a disability and their families were undoubtedly those who bore the brunt of the cruel austerity policies imposed by successive governments and who continue to be treated as though they were second-class citizens. The lack of impetus surrounding the ratification of the CRPD will be interpreted by some as a further sign of a government who are aloof and who are not committed, as they should, to ensuring that all citizens of this country are treated equally. I recently attended a briefing in Leinster House organised by Senator John Dolan of the Disability Federation of Ireland, where I heard the powerful testimonies of some of those living with a disability in Ireland and what they must endure on a daily basis. They all shared the belief that the ratification of the CRPD would greatly improve their lives. We must ensure that all legislation required to ratify this convention is progressed as a matter of urgency. My involvement in this issue was further accentuated when I became chair of the joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice and Equality almost a year ago. On formation, the new committee agreed a work programme that included a dress of disability legislation. Let me be very clear. The joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice and Equality are not an obstacle to the speed in which this convention will be ratified. We continuously press government to present us with committee stage of the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill and are, I am confident, unanimously committed to its speediest passage into law. There has been, of course, some valid criticisms, concerns expressed regarding the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill. Its principal aim, as we all know, is to reform national law to enable Ireland to ratify the UN CRPD. While my party has welcomed all progress towards ratification, we had serious concerns in relation to this legislation when it was published, and some of the deficiencies, some of the almost blank pages have already been referred to by some of the panel speakers. However, we did not even have to go to the first page of the bill's text to identify the first glaring problem. we only needed to look at the title. When the general scheme of this bill was introduced, it included the word equality, a critically important word. Many of us were baffled when we read the new title, which very obviously excluded the word equality. That is what the whole bill is supposed to be about, ensuring that all people with disabilities and all people generally are treated equally, equality. It is my opinion that we should revert to the original title. A critical aspect when formulating legislation is engagement with NGOs and those who are directly affected by the proposed legislation. I was deeply disappointed to learn of the lack of engagement with those voices on the drafting of this bill. It is unfortunate, disappointing, and in my mind, bad practice that no public consultation on these matters has taken place. The lack of consultation was quite obvious, considering the number of problems that existed. Furthermore, it is bad practice and worrying to learn that some sections, including the very important section on the deprivation of liberty, have not yet been made available. These must be made available as soon as possible, because as Article 4.3 of the Convention itself states, and I quote, "In the development and implementation of legislation and policies to implement the present Convention and in other decision-making processes concerning issues relating to persons with disabilities, state parties shall closely consult with and actively involve persons with disabilities." And the word shall isn't an option, it's a definite. I welcome the fact that this bill amends the Juries Act of 1976 so that a person who is deaf shall not be ineligible for jury service by reason only of his or her requiring the services of a sign language interpreter. And thank you. But we must ensure support for people with other types of disabilities too. In terms of monitoring and coordination, the UN recommend that the focal point should be at the head of government. Unfortunately, this recommendation has not been reflected in the bill. Instead, the government indicated that they planned for the Department of Justice to be the focal point, but this would, in my view, be purely administrative. This is not acceptable. Administrative designation will just not cut it. If government are serious about the successful implementation of this convention, then they should appoint the Taoiseach and his department as the focal point. As recently as this week, I received correspondence from the Minister of State for Disability, Fine McGrath TD, in relation to progress on the road to ratification. While I do not doubt that he is eager to have the convention ratified, I do believe that some greater impetus could be injected into the whole process. While referring to the progress made, he made reference to the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act of 2015, which was signed into law on the 30th of December 2015. This legislation has the potential to significantly improve the lives of those persons with disabilities to whom it applies, as their ability to make decisions for themselves will be enshrined in law. However, the Minister failed to mention that only a small part of this bill has commenced. He indicated to me that he was not in a position to give a time frame. But rest assured, and I'm saying this to you, myself, and on behalf of the committee that I represent here this afternoon, that in my position as Chair of the Justice and Equality Committee and as my party's spokesperson on disability rights, I will continue to press the Taoiseach and the Minister of State on this and help ensure that the CRPD is ratified at the earliest possible date. Focal score, a last word, and interestingly reflective of views already expressed by John Dolan a short few moments before I came to address the conference. Nothing, I believe, will convince us more of government's genuine intent towards people with disabilities, then they're branding Budget 2018 as the budget to restore and progress the rights and needs of people with disabilities. It is long past time that the austerity cuts were reversed, that the long identified needs of people with disabilities were properly resourced, and that this significant body of first-class citizens, my brother included, were given the opportunity to realise their full potential and as a right. Legislative change is welcome, but of little practical comfort if people with disabilities have to resort to the courts to force government to give effect to legislative provision. The time to take that decision, for government to take that decision, is now, and each relevant government department should be instructed to prepare its budgetary plan accordingly. Go to Míle Maith Galar.